My name is Jim Austin. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this 2020 WebXam User Workshop. I have a very small part, just to point out that we have our agenda here, and our team is ready and waiting to present after I do some brief overviews. Could you advance, please? Thank you. So the test scores are data and can be information. They're used at the local district level for program management, for specialized data analysis, and also through a voluntary system providing high quality student data. At the state level, ODE Career Tech Office uses them to work with their CT26 that the local districts submit for funding, for building and district report cards, and for an annual federal report. And then the last use is that quality program reviews are also supported by the scores. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. Before we sort of delve into WebXam as it stands currently, I did want to take a few seconds to wrap up the 2019-2020 school year, which was obviously different than many others. To begin with, I just want to thank everybody, all the districts and the ITCs and everybody for everything they did to upload or enter course data into WebXam. Over 230,000 grades were provided and ultimately reported through the ITCs to the districts and into EMS. And we really appreciate, again, all of your support in that process. One of the questions we sort of had in the survey for this workshop and in the lead up to this workshop was regarding education portfolios. I did want to make sure you were aware that if you are an education principles teacher, that portfolio, if you rated it last year, was not used as part of the scoring process. It was solely based on the course grade. But if your students completed that portfolio last year and it was rated, and that student was a junior last year and is now a senior, those ratings can be used this year along with their typical assessment. So I do want to sort of take a quick second now to talk about remote proctoring. I'm just going to point out that we're continuing to work with our industry partners and with ODE to try to find a remote testing solution for you. At present, one is not available. So far, we found the cost is high, the effectiveness is mixed, and there are some privacy and equity issues that we're trying to sort of figure out as we examine various solutions. I just want to remind you that until we have a remote testing solution in place, WebXam testing must be proctored in person and must be done on district managed equipment. When there are updates to this process, we'll communicate that via the newsletter, on the website, and through the Ohio Department of Education. I want to briefly talk about the WebXam welding performance assessments as well. The welding performance assessments are not required for this school year. They're undergoing review at the state level. The education portfolios are still required, but the welding performance assessments are not for this school year. And with that, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Tyler Deegan, who's going to talk about updates to WebXam this year.
Hi, I'm Tyler Deegan, and I'll be walking you through the WebXam updates for this year. Second, please. Richard, I think Maybe with the recording, I might not be able to have access to the screen, so you might just need to click through the slides for me if that's all right.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Yes. Go ahead.
Perfect. Okay. So if you could advance, please. Okay, so the first update is that you can now purchase pre-testing credits via credit card. You can either pay at the time you place the order or later as needed, but you can still pay by purchase order as in the past. Next slide. Creating pre-test orders will work very closely to how it worked in the past. You just now have the option to make your order a credit card order with that checkbox there. If it's a credit card order, no PO number will be needed. The next slide, please. Once you've filled out the order, regardless of if it's a credit card order or a PO order, you'll encounter this new order confirmation screen where you can double check your order details. Once it looks good to you, click the confirm button as the order will not be saved until then. The next slide. After confirming your order, you'll be redirected to the list of orders with this green success banner at the top. Clicking the link in that banner will redirect you to our secure payment processor, where you'll enter your credit card information for payment. However, if you're not ready to pay at the time you made the order, you can still find the order later in your order history and pay via the Pay Now link on the right. If you have an existing order that you'd like to be converted into a credit card order, just reach out to WebXam support and we can arrange that for you. But either way, once you've paid, your order status will change from Pay Now to Paid. And then next slide. Thanks. The next update is that the page students see when they complete an assessment has changed. The focus is now on the test the student just completed. Buttons to show all test results and outcome scores are available, and outcomes are based on all post-tests that could be used as part of a pathway score calculation. Next slide, please. So here's an example of the new end of assessment page. Please note that the current test is the primary focus of the page. Any pathway scores that would be affected by this score are also displayed, and links to all test results and outcome scores are available. Next slide, please. And then the final update is that a new self-service roster upload process is available, allowing you to complete uploads in a matter of minutes. Please know that at any time in the process, you can opt to send your upload files to WebXam for processing, as has been done in the past. For more information about changes to the upload format and to get the template, visit webexam.org/public/upload. Many of you have already been using the new upload process. For those who haven't, you can expect your first upload to take a little longer as you address issues that arise, but as you do more uploads, things will go a lot quicker. Next slide, please. Over the next several slides, we're going to quickly walk through the new process for uploading student rosters. First, you're going to log into WebXam and select Roster Upload under Secondary Student. So on the left, you'll see Roster Upload right there under Secondary Student. Next, you're going to upload your file by selecting the Browse button and then selecting Upload. ITC users must select the district they're uploading on behalf of as well. ITC staff performing uploads on behalf of districts may need to resolve any errors that arise with the district they are uploading for. If needed, please feel free to contact WebXam for additional assistance. Here's a screenshot of the new roster upload tool. You'll start by clicking that Browse button, selecting your Excel or CSV file, and then pressing Upload. If the upload has any issues that prevent processing the file, you'll see a list of those errors. At this point, if you're not sure how to fix those problems or just prefer that we process the file on your behalf, you'll click the red Send Upload File to Support button. Here's an example of an upload file with issues. There's a summary of issues at the top as well as issues listed row by row. You can also choose to filter the rows with the View Errors Only checkbox, just below that error summary. If you do choose to send the file to WebXam for processing, we ask that you do so via the red upload button and not via email, as email is not a secure means of file transmission. If you decide to resolve the issues in the file yourself, please make the changes in the original file and re-upload the file as per step 2. If your file has no errors, you'll see a Process Upload button that you can use to complete the roster upload process. Please pay attention to the additional informational messages displayed to ensure the file processes as you expect. So here's an example of a file with no errors and with the green process upload button in the bottom left. Any issues that will not prevent the processing of the file are highlighted in blue. Most commonly, these are a change in the student's name or location. Please be sure to review those changes to make sure they are as expected. So next, you're going to select Process Upload to complete the upload process. You'll be shown a report when the upload is complete, which you can copy for your records. And then here's a screenshot of the completed roster upload process. You can see the upload results at the bottom. Clicking the green Copy Results button will allow you to paste the report elsewhere via Control-V or Apple V if you're a Mac user. And that's all there is to it. And that wraps up our WebXam updates. So thank you, and up next is Angie to talk about the testing calendar.
Richard, if you wouldn't mind advancing my slides like Tyler, that would be great.
I think we'll be doing that from now on, so no problem.
Thank you. Go ahead and advance. So the first thing I want to touch upon with regard to the WebXam testing calendar is that all the dates currently are relatively tentative due to issues regarding the coronavirus. If your school would happen to shut down or we might happen to shut down again, then this is all relatively tentative. However, that being said, there is 1 week left in fall pre-testing, so you still have time to get those pre-tests in and get those pre-testing orders in if you'd like to complete pre-testing this year. We will also have a pre-testing window in January for a month, and that will open up and it will be pretty much exactly like the fall. Post-testing, practice testing, and some field testing begins on November 2nd. When I say some field testing, I am referring to the fact that some of the construction tests were not completed, which we will touch upon in item writing. And the ones that were completed will be hopefully available for field testing. If you are using post-testing for teacher effectiveness, those tests must be posted by April 23rd of 2021 in order to be counted. Next slide, please. In order to find the WebXam calendar, there are a handful of locations you can find that at. First off is the WebXam homepage. So when you're logged in on the landing site that you see, under recent news and announcements is the calendar listed out. You can also find the calendar on the WebXam news page, which also features a blog, more information about how testing works and how testing development works. But there is also a separate link specifically for the calendar. If you have not signed up for our monthly newsletter, I would highly recommend that you do so. It's filled with a lot of updates with regard to the calendar, as well as updates to the program overall. It is released monthly, and there is a calendar listed on the bottom of the newsletter. So those are 3 high-profile locations where you can find the WebXam calendar. Next slide, please. So now we're going to go into recruitment and item writing. There's a lot of item writing going on for 2021. And first off, I'm going to have Ruth Ann Falconer discuss the first 2 topics with regard to this, one of which is construction, which she covered while I was out on leave. Ruth Ann, feel free.
Thank you, Angie. As you can see on your screen, we have several construction tests to still write. If you look at the first one, that's mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems. We did get the questions written for that, but we still need to do our large group review. And we're anticipating doing that on the 16th, which would be a week from today. We're also looking at doing that in the evening from 3 to 5. We also have partial questions written for masonry, brick, and block. And those questions we're hoping to get finalized on the 26th from 3 to 5, and then following up with a large group review on the 29th. The remaining courses that we need to write to are also listed there: concrete, residential masonry, pipe fitting and plumbing systems, residential and commercial plumbing systems, alternative power generation systems, power line, high voltage power transmission, architecture design, structural and mechanical, electrical, plumbing, architectural design, site and foundation plans, facility and building maintenance, and interior design. The quality of these tests is definitely based on the item writers, and we would love to have your teachers help us in writing these items. It's very, very important that we have the teachers who are actually teaching these courses involved in that item writing. So if you could encourage those teachers to give us a call, that would be awesome. Next slide, please. So Angie has been trying to communicate with those teachers that we were just talking about, and has had not very good of a response. She sent out a survey and was asking for responses to that. We've not received those back. So we're concerned about getting the subject matter experts, the SMEs, to participate. We're hoping that you will be able to help us with that. Again, we're scheduling the workshops during off-duty, or when teachers are not teaching. And the reason is we know it is very challenging to have teachers run either hybrid or online instruction, and then also try to write these questions. So we're going to have them do it after school hours. Again, 3 to 5 is our target time. We will be providing a stipend, and that is $200. It goes directly to those teachers since they are off duty. And so we're hoping that they'll be able to do, to dedicate some of their off hours to do that. We would love for, again, you to encourage your teachers to participate. If you have a teacher, or if you know of a teacher who could assist, please let me know. My email is shown there. I'm not a direct employee of Ohio State, so my email is a little bit different. So you'll want to make a note of that, and you can contact me directly. We are anticipating that everything will be done by December, so that those tests will also be available to you at the beginning of the year. So again, that all depends on the response of the teachers. Let's go to the next slide. Another test that we're working on is the CNC end of course. That's under the engineering manufacturing career field. It's been determined by ODHE, Ohio Department of Higher Education, that that particular course could possibly be a CTAG or a CTAN. So we are looking at doing a revision, so to speak, of that particular course. We won't be changing any of the other questions, but we may be adding additional questions so that it meets the criteria of allowing that course to be a CTAG. The process for recruitment has begun, and so again, if you have someone that you believe would be good, you can either email me at the email address on the previous screen, or for either construction or CNC, you can always email seatrecruiting@osu.edu. Okay.
So the major career field that we are supposed to be writing this year is health science. And that includes all pathways and all courses under health science, including a new course that they want to develop called Integrated Behavioral Health. We are recruiting for this right now. We have sent out a few, what I prefer to call a broad reach survey, which is just generalized information with a survey link in order to understand what the teachers are capable of teaching and what they're capable of writing items for. So when they fill out that survey, I take that survey, I batch it to our course assignments from ODE, and then reach out to them for those specific courses for item writing. So that survey is already currently out in the field. It will be going out again a few more times before this process begins. We are looking to do a standards alignment, which is where we match the old items to the new items. or I'm sorry, the old items to the new standards, that's better, and do some editing and some cleanup so those items can be utilized in the item bank. We also will be doing new item writing for the courses, as well as validation and standard setting on both the old items and the new items. So if you have health science teachers, if that might be interested in participating, that is the survey that they can fill out in order to let me know their background information. And if you're interested, please feel free to email me and I will give them more information with regard to that. Next slide, please. Much like welding, baking and pastry arts has decided to create a performance assessment in order to do a demonstrative test to meet CTAG, CTAN expectations. We are working with Mary Jo Cole and a few individuals at ODHE to find secondary and post-secondary instructors to create this performance assessment, and it has to go through multiple stages before it is completed. The preliminary meeting for this was just conducted on Wednesday. However, there are more meetings on the way. If you are interested, you can reach out to me for more information using that email that you see there. Next slide, please. And so now we have Becky, who's going to let you know about our blueprints.
Hi, everyone. I'm Becky Barenbaum. I'm one of the people who helps write tests at SEAT. Basically, I use statistics to help make sure that tests are a good measure of ability. And what that is test blueprints, which I'm going to talk to you about today. So what is a test blueprint? A test blueprint is a plan that guides the content of a test. So just like a blueprint for a house tells you how much space is given to a certain area or room, a test blueprint does the same thing. It tells you how much test space is given to each content area. And specifically, we use it to plan how many items or questions are written to each course standard. So generally, more important content areas will end up with more test questions. And content standards are based on course outlines provided by ODE. And these are decided before the workshop and can't be edited the day of. Next slide, please. Right, so what the blueprint does, it uses information from subject matter experts to determine how important each content standard is. And this guides the item writing or question writing stage of test development. And that tells us how many items should be created for each outcome. So generally, we'll see that less important outcomes will have fewer items on the test or sometimes none. One thing to note, outlines are organized by strands at the highest or broadest level, and then outcomes, and then competencies at the most detailed level. And we write blueprints at the outcome level, that middle level, but item writers can choose which competency they write questions for within each outcome. And again, ODE provides must-haves, and these are at the competency level, so which competencies have to be included in the test. All right, next slide. So here's a little flowchart of how the blueprint gets made. So first, SEAT will ask instructors what content standards are more important and easier to write questions to. And this is rated for each outcome in a survey. Then SEAT uses those survey responses to make a bank blueprint before the item writing workshop. And we mainly use importance to determine how many questions are written per outcome, but also a small adjustment is made based on ability to write ratings. We also, again, have a list of the must-have competencies provided by ODE or ODHE. And then SMEs can make small adjustments the day of the item writing workshop. So for example, we might decide to write 6 items instead of 5 items for a particular outcome. SMEs don't usually make large changes unless very few people rated outcomes for that course. Then finally, a set number of test questions are written to each outcome based on the tweaked blueprint. Great, next slide, please. Great, and there's an important distinction to be made between the bank blueprint and the composition of the test. So a bank blueprint is not a test blueprint. The bank blueprint guides the 100 or so test items that will be written for the course. And the test won't match the blueprint exactly, but it should be very close. And it ends up being different because we don't use all of the items in the bank in the final tests. Right, next slide. So some more on why it's different. So some test questions get dropped. Not all of them can be used. There may be no items for less important outcomes. If there are only 1 or 2 questions for an outcome, it's less likely to show up on the test. Sometimes there are no high quality test questions written for an outcome, and in that case, it won't be included on any tests either. And we're also constrained a bit because we have to match the pre-test and the post-test for content, so that might factor in. One more reason is that there are 40 items on the test and 100 or so items in the bank. So the proportion of items per outcome can't be identical. Just mathematically, there's some rounding up and down. And then finally, we have to balance maximizing the quality of the test questions, which we can see through instructor ratings and item statistics, with matching the bank blueprint. Right, next slide. Okay, and what items do get included? So we always generate more items than we're going to need. We field test all of the items that are approved by subject matter experts on the day of the item writing workshop. And then that field test data is used to identify which items are the best items. So when we analyze this data, it tells us which items may have problems. So are more students getting the item wrong than would be expected, or maybe stronger students are getting the item wrong? And we also use subject matter expert ratings of quality to filter out bad items. We get the ratings from another group of subject matter experts during a standard setting and validation workshop, where they rate each item on quality and how essential they are to the test. So that also helps us filter out bad items. Right, next slide, please. Okay, so blueprints are posted because we want you to have an idea of what's on the test. We don't want anyone to feel surprised. So to find the blueprints, you're first going to go to the webexam.org homepage and click on About the Tests. Next slide. And here you'll see all of the available pathways, and then you'll click on the Blueprints button for whichever pathway you're interested in. Just as a side note, construction blueprints aren't up right now because the banks weren't written due to COVID-19. Right, next slide. So there you'll see a blueprint table for each test, and it'll be organized by the strand. And on the right, you'll see a percentage of items in the bank from each outcome. And again, this is based on all of the items that were approved by subject matter experts. Next slide. Great, and here's an example. This is just a partial view of the child and adolescent development blueprint, just so we could zoom in a little. We're showing about the first 3 strands or so. And you can see if you look under strand 3, those are some higher percentages. So you can see that there are more items in strand 3 because that's where the meat of the course is, which makes sense. It's really important for students in a child development course to know about learners and their development. So that's just an example of how to interpret a blueprint. Right, next slide. And then just one more note on blueprints. You can help us design the blueprints this year if you're a health science teacher. So please send your contact information to Bridget McHugh at the email address that's printed on the slide, and we will add you to our list. Okay, and I will pass it off to Brock.
Hello, everyone. I will be doing a walkthrough of the WebXam interface for anyone that's not familiar with it. If you want to go ahead and proceed. So the very first thing when you start using WebXam is to go to the webexam.org homepage. When you log into the site, all users for WebXam go to this main site and log in. That includes the students, teachers, and administrator accounts. Once you've logged in, the system will determine what type of account you have and what you see after that. For teachers and administrators, it can be important to know how to reset your password. Students' passwords are automatically set and don't need to be reset, but teachers and administrators sometimes will forget it. So we have a button there underneath the login that says forget your password. And if you click on reset, it'll take you to a page that asks you for your email address. So with WebXam, when an account is created, we ask for an email address to be provided. It's important to have that email address correct because we send anybody who has an account in WebXam, that's a teacher or an administrator, is automatically signed up to our newsletter where we send information, as well as that email address is what's used if you've forgotten or need to change your password. You can simply go to the reset form, enter in the email address that we have on file, and we will send you a link that allows you to reset it. If you have forgotten your email address or it was set up wrong, you would need to contact our support team. We'll verify who you are and we'll be able to make that change. Also be aware if your school district changes their email, you'll want to log in and update the email address that you have on file with us so you continue to receive our communications. Once you've logged in, you will see the homepage of WebXam. So I'll be reviewing a couple of the different menu options here and kind of explaining some different details. One thing that you'll notice is in the central area there, we have links to any articles that we've posted on our website. And then down below that, you'll see a calendar information. We're always trying to make sure that people that are using WebXam have notifications about upcoming deadlines and when testing windows open and close. So we really try and put that, as Angie showed earlier, in a number of different locations so that people are up to speed about some of the requirements about testing throughout the school year. We also have the colored boxes above that link to important articles. And we'll be looking at a couple other places where those resources are linked also. The first part that I would like to go over are going to be the menu options across the top. If you want to advance the slide, please. So the first link there is the documentation. We try and provide detailed information about the most common kind of support requests and information that individuals need to operate the WebXam system. This is a rather long document, but has more of the specific details. We have system requirements, how to operate certain features like our text-to-speech, and other guidelines listed here on this page. On the sidebar there, you can jump down to different sections that interest you and find the common solutions to the questions that a lot of our users have. Then if you want to progress to the next slide. There is also a quick start option. So this is more focused on just getting something done. If you need to do a common task inside of WebXam and you log in and you've forgotten how to do it, the quick start guide has the most common tasks that individuals need to perform and just kind of a really quick roadmap on how to get that operation done. Next. So on the right-hand side, we have the support menu here. There are certain tasks that individuals can't perform on their own that they might need to reach out to our support. Maybe it's editing an account, creating a new account at a new school district, or something that needs to happen by interacting with WebXam staff. So under the support menu, we have our contact information. That includes our phone number as well as an email address you can reach out to us. If you have something that's non-time sensitive, we generally recommend that you use the email address to document what your issue is and send it to us. And then we'll, as soon as we get that, that'll create a ticket for us and we'll be able to track its completion. If you have something that's more timely and you really need a very quick response, you can call us on the telephone. We try and staff our phone lines 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. It really depends on the availability of our staff. But if you don't get an answer, you can leave a message and then we will get back to you as soon as we can. There's also provided a couple other resource links there. Again, another link to the calendar. That is the calendar that's on our news.webexam.org site. It's a public-facing website where we post public-facing content as well as the calendar. We have the link to the About the Tests page. We'll have a screenshot of that later, but that is where we have information about all the tests that are housed in WebXam. And then at the very bottom there, we have Submit a Ticket. So that's the same thing as sending in an email, but it's just embedded form inside of the website so that you can quickly go in there, enter in the question that you have, and it'll go off to us as a ticket. If you want to progress. So here's a quick screenshot of the overview of the About the Test page. So this page is really critical when you are teaching a course to find out the information that ODE houses, as well as the information that we have about the specific tests. So as you saw earlier, we have links here to the blueprints as well as the course outlines that are on ODE's website. So ODE has the course outlines, which is the subjects that you want to cover in your courses. The blueprints are going to tell you kind of the focus areas of where our items are mapped into the course outlines. And then we have the information in the tables here that have the name of the courses, the cutoff scores for the courses, whether or not it's in field testing, whether or not it has a pre-test. So you can find out all the specifics about the tests that you're teaching. One thing of note is that about every 5 years, depending on timelines, a test will get rewritten. And during that period, a test will be marked as being in field testing. For the field tests, they're run a little differently. They don't have pre-tests available. They're a longer test. So it's just nice to know when you're teaching a course whether or not the tests that you're teaching are in field testing, and you can find out that information here on this page. Next slide, please. The next menu, if you look in the top right-hand corner here, we're looking at the user account information. When you're logged into WebXam, you can review the information that makes up your account. You could change things like your name, update your email address, as well as there's a link there to change your password. And if you're an administrator, there is an option to manage users. What that does is it lets you get a view into the user accounts that are below you, how they're organized, and you can allow different users to have access to see other things. That is something that's a little bit more of an advanced feature, and oftentimes you might want to reach out to us so that we can help you organize your school district so that everyone can see the parts that in the teacher accounts, student accounts that they need to see. Again, if that's something you're interested in, changing the way that your school district is organized, you can reach out to us. We can talk you through the steps to make sure that that's set up correctly. Next slide. So this is a view of the user search page. So now we're in the menu system on the left-hand side, which is where a lot of users, administrators, and teachers are going to be using these menus to manage their accounts. So the user search page is a global search across all account types that your account can see. For a teacher, this is generally just going to be focused on their students and only going to be showing their students. For an administrator, it would show student accounts, teacher accounts, and any other administrators that are below their account. The idea here is that you have a listing of the accounts that you can see, which is the table that is down below. And above that, there are options to filter the results in the tables down to just the accounts that you're interested in seeing. What you can do is enter in information into the filters box, like let's say the name. You could just enter in a first name And then the table below that will filter down to just accounts that match that name type. You can search by first name, last name, and then the other fields you can do specifics like username, filtering down to just specific account types, locations, or you can be very specific and use the local ID and find a specific account by typing that in. So again, this is global, so it's going to be over multiple different account types. WebXam has several different account types, and each one of the menus that we're going to be discussing coming up here are involved in the different account types. So what I'd like to recommend is looking over to the left-hand side. You'll see administrator, teacher, assessor, adult student, and secondary students. These are the different account types, and those menus is where you'd go to focus in on just one type of account. We'll go in a little bit more detail into the secondary students in a minute, because that's where a lot of the teachers and administrators are going to be focusing, is editing student accounts. Next slide, please. So before we go into the secondary students, I wanted to talk about the order tests option. So if you are needing to order tests for pre-testing, this is where an administrator would be able to go in and choose to order a new test or view tests that they'd ordered in the past. There's also the ability to reassign credits. So if you purchase a bunch of credits for your school district, you might need to shuffle those credits between teachers. If one teacher runs out, you'd have the ability to go in and select that there. Next slide, please. So now we're looking at the secondary students, which is where I said a lot of times you're going to be going in here as a teacher or an administrator to review just your secondary students' accounts. You have the filters options like we discussed earlier, where you can narrow down the results that are being shown. You also have the ability to create a new student account. If you look in the left-hand side, there is the new option. We generally recommend that the school districts try and create student accounts using the roster upload option, which is also the link there in the sidebar. So roster uploads is where a school district can run a report that includes all of the student data that's required for WebXam, and they can send that file to us and say at the beginning of the school year, we'll process that file and load all the data for their students. This is generally a much more efficient use of time than individually entering in students, and it's also generally more accurate because you can generate your report, you can review it, make sure everything's correct, and then send it to us. So when you're using that roster upload link in the sidebar there, it'll take you to a page that has a template file that you can download. We generally recommend that you're going to want to download that template file every year and populate the data and then send it through the roster upload link. That, as discussed earlier, that link has changed when you process a file. It is now immediate. You'll get results back showing whether or not there's any errors in your data. If you have errors, you can correct them and re-upload your file. Until there are no errors at that point, the file can be processed and your student data will be updated immediately. We do generally recommend that school districts upload a file every year. The reason being is if you send in a file every year and that data is accurate, we'll update all the data on the account, including their grade level, their graduation year, as well as we'll add any of the new student-teacher relationships that would happen that year. So if a student's in a new course and they have a teacher, the upload file has that information, and then we'll be able to assign that student to the teacher. So when the teacher goes in and needs to give a test, they'll be able to see the student and activate that test for them. Next slide, please. So here we're starting to look at the Activate Test menu. So teachers, when they're going in and needing to activate a test, they'll go to the Activate Test menu, and then they'll see what I would call a wizard. It'll go through and ask a series of questions to determine exactly who the students are that are eligible to test, and then you'll be able to activate those students. So on the first page, it's going to ask you who the teacher is. If you're an administrator, you might be an administrator activating a test for a teacher. You would choose the teacher here. If you are a teacher, generally it's going to have your name already populated because it knows that you are walking through activating tests for yourself. On the next slide, you'll be asked to select the location that owns the program that the test is part of. So what we want to do here is we're trying to determine who owns the program that is part of the program is the series of tests or the pathway that the school district is teaching. We want to relate back the individual tests to a location so that when we report the data, it's going to the owner of the program. On the next slide, please. So here on this page, we allow you to choose what type of test you're going to be activating. There's little buttons there. They're going to change throughout the year depending on which tests are available. So in the screenshot, we're selecting it test. During the pre-testing season, you'll also see an option for, so that in the next step, you'll be able to choose. Nope, you're good. You can go to the next one. So here we've selected post-test. In the next slide, that drop-down menu would only show the post-tests. So what we're trying to do is selectively narrow down the students that will display at the end based off of the criteria that are assigned onto the accounts. So in the next slide. So we've selected the pathway in the previous slide. Now we're selecting the individual course that you're going to be testing that day. And then if you hit next one more time, WebXam at this point has gone through, taken all the questions that you've answered and looked for any students that are eligible to take that test. So if a student's already tested in this current school year, they wouldn't show up here. But the students that are listed here are students that haven't tested in the school year and have that course assigned to their account. Once you're on this page, you would a teacher would go in and check mark next to the names. So it's a check mark just to the left of the names of any student that is present that day and needs to be taking the test. You can also notice that there's little flags next to the students' names. It's very important to make sure that students have the proper accommodation set on their account. Once you've started a test, we can't go back and add an accommodation. So we give one more indicator here just to make sure that you're aware of what students do have accommodations. So if you determine, oh, the student should have one, but they don't have a flag, you'd want to go back and edit that student's account to make sure that they have the accommodation set correctly. There are also some advanced options here. There is a little menu there in the middle that says activation start time. You do have the ability to schedule these tests in advance. If you go into that menu, you could say, schedule a time for this test activation to happen on maybe a Wednesday morning, a couple days in advance, so that you can kind of set up these tests ahead of time. Quite often, a lot of teachers will go in and do this just before the test session, which is what we're expecting here if you don't use that advanced option. We check mark next to the students' names, and then the bottom right-hand corner, there is the next option, the next button, which would activate the tests. If you want to advance the slide. So what we've done here is this is after you would have activated the test. If you look in the activation window column on the right-hand side, you'll now see that there's actually a time listed. When you activate a test, the WebXam system opens up a window of time for 1 hour where the students have the opportunity to sit down at a computer, log in with their account information, and the test will be listed as eligible for them to click a Start Now button and start taking the test. We have this 1 hour activation window as a security measure, so students only will be able to see their tests when they're in school. They won't be able to go home and log in later and take a test. We have this shorter window of time where they actually get the opportunity to go in there and start taking the test. Another thing to note, on the bottom left-hand side, there is a download button where when you've activated your test, if you click on that, it'll download a file for you of the students that you've activated, as well as their account information so that they can log in. So you have a quicker way of getting the student information that you can distribute to your students so they'd be able to get into their accounts and test. Next slide, please. That's the wrap up of my walkthrough. Richard will be talking about some of the reporting features, which is a kind of continuation of the walkthrough that I was doing. Thanks.
Okay, hello everybody. Before I delve into the fun of WebXam Reports, I do just want to take a few seconds and hit some of the questions that have popped up in the chat. The first question was regarding the field test window. So again, in the testing calendar, the situation is that field testing will open at the same time as post-testing on November 2nd. And that will include many of the construction technologies tests, but not all of them. As you saw from Ruth Ann Falconer's presentation, some of the construction tests still need to be completed or written altogether. And when those tests are available for field testing, we'll announce that to the field as well. I think we hope to have that available by the first of the year. But as we've discussed, there's some issues with the availability for the construction teachers. Obviously, this is a difficult year. So it really depends on us getting those subject matter expert teachers in to help us write those tests. And when I say in, of course, I mean in virtually. We can work with teachers remotely to write these items. The next question was someone saying that they're a new administrator and do they need to create teacher accounts or are they already there? And the answer is it depends. If you're sort of taking over for an existing administrator, they may have already created those student or those teacher accounts. And if you can't see them, if you don't see any teacher accounts, just please contact us because it may be that those accounts already exist and you just need access to them. So that is that question. So like I said, if you can't see teacher accounts, feel free to contact us. We can make sure that everything is configured as it should be. I just realized my video wasn't started. The last question was about practice tests. And the question was, are there going to be practice tests available for engineering principals? So the practice tests are available by pathway. So there's an engineering practice test, which will be new. And then there's construction practice tests, there's agriculture practice tests. There's a practice test for each pathway. And those will be available on November 2nd as well. We don't offer practice tests for specific tests. Instead, it's just for the pathway as a whole. And those can be taken by your students. Those can also be taken by teachers to sort of help familiarize yourself with the tests using content from the subject area that you teach. So that is available to you as needed. And a little bit later, we'll get into some other ways to sort of see how WebXam tests are structured. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get into WebXam Reports, hopefully. So I'm just going to upfront say there's not a huge amount of updates to WebXam Reports this year. In general, this year they've maintained a pretty consistent state. The major sort of updates were around supporting the course grades that all of you uploaded last year. With that said, we'll go through all of the reports in WebXam today, and those reports are the summary report, the testing report, the pathway report, teacher effectiveness, the end of year export preview report, the outcome, and the activations report. So let's talk about some features that are common across all of our reports. The first is that those reports are exportable, either as PDF or as Excel files. You can also copy those results into a clipboard to paste into any application that you want to. For example, if you're pasting data into your student information system, you can do so using the copy option in the reports. And then in most of the reports, there's a green plus next to the student's name or the student's identifier that will show you all of that student's testing activity. And that would include their pathway scores. And we'll sort of show this in a few minutes here, but you'll see that there's a ton of detail about student reporting that's available to you. So let's just start going through report by report here, and we'll start with the summary report. So the summary report is designed for you to verify that you've given the tests that you believe you have given, or if you're an administrator, to make sure that your teachers have given the tests that they need to give. It can also be used to verify that the test will be reported to the correct district. You know, Brock talked a little bit earlier about how in that activation process in step 2, you choose the district or career center that sort of owns the program that you're assessing in. And that information that you enter in that step 2 is displayed here in the summary report. So you can make sure that if you've given a test, that you report it back to the correct district. And if you notice an issue for a testing session, maybe say, oh, well, this should have gone to the career center, but it got marked to go to a local district, or vice versa. You just submit a ticket into WebXam using the email address, or you can even call in, whatever works, and we can get that updated for you so those test results get reported to the right place. It is really important to us, and it's obviously really important to you to make sure these test results get reported to the right place, so they can get into EMIS, so it can factor into report cards when report cards come back again. So please make sure to, as an administrator in particular, to check that summary report to make sure those tests are getting reported to the right place. Here's a sample of the summary report. Now, I know this is a little bit small. I did post in the chat a link to the presentation. So if you need to go back afterwards and sort of look at this a little more closely, that's fine. Or if you're following along with the presentation right now, it might be easier to see. But as you can see, as an administrator, you're seeing a lot of information. You're seeing all of the sort of tests that have been given by your teachers. And so you'll see the test's ID, the name of that test, which teacher gave that test, what district that test is going to be reported under. And that's sort of what we talked about a little bit on the last slide. You'll also see the number of students that have taken that test and how many of them has passed. If this were showing a pretest, that passed column would be blank, since we don't really have performance standards for pretests. Okay, that is the summary report. So let's now go into the next report on that list, and that's the testing report. And the testing report is used to generate reports on student scores for individual tests. It can generate reports on pre-tests and post-tests. We don't offer reporting on practice tests. The one thing I want to cover with the testing report, and this is also true for the pathway report, is that the grade level parameter is tricky. It's based on the grade level of the student at the time they took the test. So if you create a testing report and you say, I want to see this report for juniors in this particular year, you're going to see the report for the students that were juniors at the time that they took that test. And this again sort of calls back to what Brock was saying about the roster uploads and making sure the grade levels are correct before you do your testing. If you give a student a test and they're marked as a sophomore in WebXam, and then later on you go and change their grade level to a junior, in WebXam they'll still be marked as a sophomore for the purposes of this grade level reporting in the testing and pathway reports. So you just want to make sure that as early as possible you get in and you update those grade levels. And while we're covering that, I'd also say to archive any students that have graduated or students that are no longer going to be testing. So a little bit more about the testing report. After running a testing report, below the actual list of students, you'll see aggregate data, both for that particular report that you just ran and statewide. And I want to add one new thing this year, fairly recently in fact, is that even if your report returned no results, you will now see an aggregate report showing statewide data based on the parameters you selected for the report. And that was a user suggestion that we added in, I think, about 4 weeks ago. Once you've run a report and gotten results, and we'll see what these results look like in a second, there is a search box that would allow you to sort of filter within that report that you've gotten. And then I want to add that, Sarah, for CTAG aligned tests and courses, certificates are available. And that's really just to cover in case the reporting process doesn't get to the post-secondary school correctly. These can be a way to help you provide evidence that the student completed these tests. So once you've run a pathway report, and in this case, I ran a report for the AFNR test, you'll see student results, and you'll see the student's first name or last name. If you're an administrator, you have an option to show their SSID in that option, in those columns instead. So you'll see the test, you'll see the performance standards, and you'll see the date that the test was given. Over on the far right, probably the most important column is the sort of score level, whether the student was proficient, not proficient, or advanced. And then next to that, you'll see the actual percentage score for the student. For course grades that were uploaded last year, you won't see a percent score. You'll see an A, a P, or an N based on that WebXam performance level. And if you hover over that A, P, or N, then you'll see the percent score that's going to be used for pathway score calculations. So I mentioned that green plus, that at any time you can select that, and you'll see a student's full testing details. So here's an example for this student who's now taken 2 tests, 2 post-tests and 1 pre-test, no, 2 pre-tests and 1 post-test. One thing you'll notice is whether or not this score is being used in a pathway score calculation. And if it is, you'll see which pathway that score is being used as part of. So again, you'll sort of see a general sense of data, including the student's pathway score. Since they've only taken 1 post-test, their pathway score is currently incomplete. And again, you can choose to export just this student data into Excel or PDF, or to copy it as needed. Okay, so that's the testing report. Let's move on to the pathway report. The pathway report is used to show student progress towards proficiency in the selected pathway. And so the report will show the student's pathway score, and it will also show the score on all their tests in that pathway. And that will include tests, a student has the option to retake a test, or in the case of course grades, has option to take the test for the first time. And it will show all the scores and will indicate which ones are being used to generate that pathway score. So I'll sort of show you that here in a second. Or even right now. So a check mark is placed next to a test that's indicated that a test is being used to calculate a pathway score. And then a little circular arrow is used to indicate if that test is eligible to be retaken in the current school year. So if you're planning test retakes, the pathway report can be effective in helping you figure out which tests students might need to retake. So a little bit more about the pathway report. After running a report, there are some options to filter the results along with the search option from the past. There's an option to only show the pathway score for each student. And that can be useful for if you're exporting that data out to sort of share with students or to share with administrators, whatever. You can only share the sort of final pathway score. And if you are an administrator, and you've done a pathway report for a specific teacher, there's also an option to sort of limit that report to this teacher's current students. And this is another situation where a user requested this feature because they needed it in order to do some reporting. And so we added that in. And again, as with the testing report, aggregate data, where applicable, is available below the main results. And as I said earlier, starting this year, even if your pathway report has no results, you'll still see statewide data. So here's the form that you fill out for a pathway report. And I wanted to show you this in particular to cover the tested during option. You'll notice there's an option to say all years and it will only it'll show you unarchived students unless you've selected a graduation year. So the graduation year is an option that's new in the past 2 years, and it is, I think it can be really useful for being able to get a sense of how a cohort of students are doing in a particular pathway. You do want to make sure that you've actually inputted that graduation year data. It's now required in the uploads, but it wasn't the last year, and it wasn't available the year before that. So if you're running reports on students that are seniors this year, you may still need to go in and update that graduation year data. And you can do that either by an upload, or you can use the secondary student menu option that Brock showed earlier to update students. So again, I just want to stress this tested during option can be really useful for doing reports. And while I'm here, I'll cover this report identifier. This is only available to administrators, but if you're generating reports that you're planning just to import into your student information system, you may wish to have the student's SSID visible instead of their name. So if we run a report, that report in particular, this is what we'll see. We'll see each student, we'll see the pathway score, and we'll see their test scores as well. It's a strange report. Anyway, so you'll see here's the students taking this pathway, and then they're in this, they're taking this test. And so you'll see some of the data about that test. You'll notice this student's only taken one test, and so they are listed as incomplete for the pathway. And this is sort of a big point. I want to focus on this last student down here. WebXam starts showing you pathway scores once a student has completed 2 assessments in that pathway. But for most programs, you need at least 3 assessments. So you do want to make sure you and your teachers are paying attention to how many tests the student has been given in order to make sure that they're reported as having been proficient in the pathway. I just want to highlight that point that it's crucial to keep track of what tests a student has taken, and to make sure that they've taken 3. Okay, certificates. For pathways, you can generate a certificate of passage for every pathway. These are generally for your information or for student information only. They don't have any like reporting value or whatever, but they are useful for students to sort of have as an indication that they completed a pathway. Okay, let's move on to the next report, which is the teacher effectiveness report. The teacher effectiveness report is about pretesting. So if you use WebXam pretesting, you can use a teacher effectiveness report to determine how well your teachers did in an assessment of student gain. So again, it reports student gain for each teacher that gave pretests and matching post-tests within the teacher effectiveness window. And this is an important point. You know, Angie mentioned earlier that for teacher effectiveness purposes this year, the deadline for giving your post-tests is April 23rd, 2021. If you gave pretests and you accidentally give post-tests after that window closes, the teacher effectiveness report will not have data for you. Along with the sort of general teacher effectiveness report for administrators, there's also a compliance report. I want to stress, despite the name, this report is not something that's reported to ODE. It's not something that's reported back to districts. It's solely for administrator use only to help you make sure that your teachers are giving the post-tests they need to give. We just want to make sure you're getting the most out of your investment in WebXam pretests. So as we get to April, I actually have this on this bullet here, as we get to April, you might, as an administrator, want to use this compliance report to make sure and to alert your teachers that they need to give particular post-tests. Let's take a quick look at what the teacher effectiveness report looks like. So this is sort of the general report. Typically, you'd see a teacher name in the first name and last name columns. You see how many tests they've given, the average score on their pretest and the average score on their post-test, what that sort of gain would end up being as a rounded value. And then there's sort of a level indication. You know, this teacher's student gain was above average. This student's teacher gain was average. This teacher's student gain was most effective. So that data is available to you. I think maybe there are some changes to how OTES reporting is working this year, but when necessary, this data can be reported as part of the OTES reports. So when you click on the green plus, you know, and other reports that would show particular student data, in this case, it's going to show you each test that teacher has given. In this case, oh, actually, I'm sorry, in the compliance report here, my apologies. So the compliance report is going to show you which tests still need to be given. So this teacher still has 3 ground maintenance tests, and the student's name would be listed here. And so that you'll know, you can alert your teacher, hey, listen, there's still these students that you need to give this ground maintenance test to. Okay, moving on to the end of year report, which is really sort of a preview of what will be reporting through your ITCs to you and then ultimately to EMIS through your district. So the end of year report shows you, what will be reported for students at the end of the year if that school year ended today. It does not include the student SSID, and it really shouldn't be used to upload data into school systems. I know that it's tempting to do so, but we don't want to risk data coming from your ITCs and then ended up doubling up test data in your student information system. So really, this should be used as a preview. You should not attempt to import this data into your school systems. The end of year report does include pathway rows, like a row to indicate how a student is doing, but that is not in the end of year export files. As of 2 years ago, we no longer report pathway scores in end of year export files. We only report tests that were given in that school year. So here's a sample of what that end of year report looks like. And so you'll see for a particular student, you'll see how many courses they have taken in that pathway, and you'll see the tests they've taken this year. And again, you'll see what the benchmark, the sort of proficient performance standard is, what their percent correct on that test was that test in field testing, and were they advanced, proficient, non-proficient. At the pathway level, you might see an I for incomplete if they haven't taken the number of tests they need to take. Okay, let's move on to the outcome report. The outcome report gives you a chance to see how your students did on a particular outcome on a particular test. Becky talked earlier about those test blueprints, and that we have sort of details available to you, but what percentage of questions address what particular standard outcome. This report allows you to see how your students did on those outcomes. So new this year is that there is a button called Student Details. It's a checkbox, and it allows you to sort of completely disaggregate all of the outcome data so that you can export that and then use that in your own reporting as you see fit. And we'll kind of show you what that looks like when you run an outcome report and then you choose the Show Student Details. You'll see for each student a large number of rows, and it'll have their full test score. And then for each outcome that's covered on their test, it'll show you what percentage of those questions they got correct. So typically these will be, there tends to only be, 2 to 3 to 4 questions per outcome. Obviously some more important outcomes, there might be a larger number of questions. So you'll see how a student did on that outcome. The student, for example, got 100% on some of these outcomes, and then maybe 50% on this outcome. And as I was saying earlier, all of these tests or all these reports are exportable, so you can use them in a way you see fit. Okay, lastly, we're going to talk about the activations report, which is for, I think it's administrators and teachers, and it's a little bit new. It's just a way to sort of give you a sense of what activations are upcoming. You know, Brock covered earlier the activation process, and he mentioned that, you know, by default, when you activate tests, it activates a student for the 1 hour starting at the moment you click that activation button. But there is an option in that activation thing at the last step to sort of schedule an activation to occur at a later date, up to 7 days in advance, if I recall correctly. And so if you're scheduling test activations into the future, this report will let you know so you can remember what you've done. And will also give you, as an administrator, a chance to sort of see, okay, what test activations are coming up in my district. So just so you can plan accordingly. So in this report, you can either specify a specific time. You can say, hey, show me any activations that are going to be occurring at 8 o'clock tomorrow. Or you can just leave that time blank, and you'll see all the upcoming activation sessions. And I'll just add that when you're on that secondary student page and you're looking at the list of students and you click the green plus to see all of their details, one of the things you'll see is if a student has an upcoming activation, you'll see it listed there as well. And it's just all about making sure that you know what's coming up for your students. Okay. Okay. So this is an example of that activation report. So you can see that this teacher has activated the web design test starting at pretty early in the morning, it looks like, and they're testing 41 students. And when you click the green plus, then you'll see each of the students that's activated for that session. You'll see their username and you'll see their password. And this can be useful for an administrator if a teacher is contacting you and say, hey, listen, I don't have my students' passwords. You can get that data from here and you'll be able to export it and send that to them if that's necessary. So just another way to sort of make sure that you have the information you need to get your testing done. And that sort of concludes the report section of this presentation. What I think we'll do is I'm going to have one more section to go through and then a little bit of a wrap up, and then we'll go through the chat and answer the questions that are in there. I'm sure there are questions in there. So for now, let me talk briefly about the WebXam, about the teacher review workshops that we generally offer. The teacher review workshops are designed to allow teachers and other stakeholders to review the WebXam assessments. And so the way these typically work is a teacher arrives, they have a username and password that's different from their current teacher account. They sign in and they can review any tests in their pathway. And what they're reviewing in that case is either the post-test, which is like a 40-item test, or if the test they want to review is in field testing currently, then they'll see that longer item, that longer test that they can go through. And for those field tests, it's really useful if teachers are participating in a teacher workshop to review the field tests, because there's an opportunity to leave comments about the questions, and those comments are used as part of how we determine which questions we keep for a post-test. If a teacher says, hey, this question is really good at covering this subject, then that's going to inform our decisions in terms of what questions make it to the post-test. So a teacher can review an assessment once during that test life cycle, and that life cycle is from field testing through to test retirement. Typically 5 years, sometimes a little bit longer. But the point is that once you review that test once, as a teacher, you can't review it again. But if you want to come back and review different tests, you're welcome to do that. So currently we're not offering these workshops, and that's just due to restrictions related to the virus. Our host institution, the Ohio State University, is operating at a low level of physical contact. So we're not able to offer these on site, and we're not able currently to provide employees to offer these sessions off site. Once we're able to do that, we'll communicate that via the newsletter, we'll communicate that on our website, and we'll communicate that in any other channel that we can. And as I was sort of saying earlier, along with options to come to our building and review tests, we also offer the ability for your school or career center to host a teacher test review session. There's some sort of details about how that can occur. So if you have questions about that, or if you're interested in scheduling one, just contact us at support. And I think at the end of this presentation, we'll sort of cover what that looks like. How to contact us, I mean. Okay, and now I just want to sort of hit the highlights, or is this Angie? Were you going to hit the highlights, or is this me?
I can do it if you like.
I've been talking so much, I might as well just keep going, right?
Whatever.
So the big takeaways and highlights from this presentation are to make sure that you check the calendar often. As Brock mentioned, that when you log into WebXam, you can see the calendar there. As Angie mentioned, if you can go to the news.webexam.org website, click on the calendar link to see the calendar there. I'll also add in that it's on the Ohio Department of Education website for career technical assessment if you want to look there. The second big point is that teacher review workshops are on hold. Once we are cleared to hold them, we'll communicate that with you as much as we can. Third big point is that post-testing, practice testing, and some field testing will open on the 2nd of November. And lastly, I just want to highlight that recruitment for construction, for computer numerical controls, for health sciences is occurring. And subject matter experts, your teachers, are key to helping us get that done. So again, if you have any questions, any support issues, as I say, questions related to this session, we'll answer in a few minutes here. But if you have questions more generally, feel free to email us, support@webexam.org, or call us at 614-292-4988. Our hours are 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday for that phone. But I do want to, Brock mentioned this, that it's really dependent upon staff availability. So if all the lines are busy, or if there just happens to be a time where no staff are available to answer the phone, please leave a message. Those messages go into our ticketing system and we respond to them as quickly as we can. And then below you'll see some links for our website, for the website of our organization, the Center for Employment and Training for Education. And then you'll also see some social media links if you need them. And so with that, we'll go through any final questions. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. And then if everyone if Tyler, Angie, Jim, Ruthann, Becky want to just hop on camera, and then we'll try to go through the questions.
I pulled all of the questions into a Word document, and I've documented them as answered or unanswered. So if that'll make things a little easier for you, then let me know.
Let's do it. That's great. You are wonderful.
So the first, I went chronologically through the chat. So the first question that popped up that wasn't addressed was by Lisa, which is, how do teachers run the student view my outcome report?
So teachers don't necessarily run the sort of student view outcome report. That's specifically for the students. For you as a teacher, you'll want to use that outcome report I covered a few minutes ago, which will get you all the data you need for your students and how they're doing on all those outcomes. Okay?
The next one is from Dawn, and it is there a way to see what students have been pre-scheduled for a test, like when a teacher schedules tests in advance?
Well, as got covered just a few minutes ago, so that question must have been before I covered the activation report. The activation report covers that, and I'll just mention again that if you're looking at that secondary student list page, you can also sort of, when you expand a student, you'll see any upcoming activations.
Barb wanted a bit more in-depth information with regard to the educational portfolios, more than what was listed on the slide.
Okay. Well, let me see what I can do. And Barb, if we don't answer your question here, if there's more specifics you need, please just send us a ticket, support@webexam.org, and we'll be happy to answer that question if we need more detail. But for the test for subject code 350010, education principles, there are 2 elements needed to receive a WebExam score. There's the end of course assessment, which is a 40-item assessment, multiple choice, sort of a typical WebExam test. And then there's also the education portfolio. And so students that are in that subject code, that 350010 subject code, they have to take that test, and then they have to complete a portfolio. When they've completed that portfolio, it has to be reviewed by at least 2 assessors. And you sort of saw that assessor checkbox or that assessor menu item when Brock was going through WebExam. And we can cover this in more detail, but you create assessor accounts as a teacher, and then you assign maybe via an email with that assessor, whatever, you assign which students' portfolios you're going to want them to review. And then they review those. If the 2 assessors' scores are not discrepant, they're not off by a large amount, then that's all you need to do. If the 2 assessors review a portfolio at a wide range, like one of them gets them a 30%, the other one gives them an 80%, then you need to bring in a 3rd assessor to sort of mediate that difference. And you can know that in that testing report, when you run that specifically for the education principles test, you'll see there's a column, is an additional assessor needed? And that'll be a yes or a no. And so if an additional assessor is needed, it'll say yes, and you'll know you need to sort of schedule another assessor for that student. And then the breakdown is, once you've done the portfolio and you've given the end of course test, it's 60% of the WebExam score is based on the end of course test, and 40% is based on the education portfolio that the student completed. So like I said, Barb, or anyone else, if you have any additional questions, just send us an email to support@webexam.org, and we'll be happy to work with you.
In relation to performance assessments, Stephanie asked, where do performance assessments live on WebExam?
So for the welding performance assessments, they are not currently visible on WebExam because they're not required this year. We don't have that available. I'm going to talk about this a little bit because you will have noticed some changes to teacher settings. You'll notice that when you're looking at a teacher's account and you're editing it, there's an option say, is this a welding teacher? And that is when we are offering welding performance assessments, that allows that teacher to review their students' welding performance. So if you have any welding teachers in your school or at your career center, you may want to just do that now. Just go through your welding teachers and say, this is a welding instructor. Now the welding instructor can do that themselves when they log into WebExam. Brock showed you click on your name at the top right, you choose my account. A welding teacher can also go in there and say, I'm a welding instructor. So I just wanted to cover that. There have been some questions about that option when you're editing a teacher account, and that's what that's for. Another thing I want to cover, it's a lot of information, when you're creating an assessor account, you'll be choosing whether or not that assessor is going to be reviewing a welding performance assessment or an education portfolio, or soon a baking and pastry arts eclair, I guess. When you're creating assessor accounts, you'll choose what sorts of things are going to be reviewing.
So Shelley asked about remote proctoring, which Tyler answered beautifully, but she had a follow-up question. She asks, will remote proctoring be decided before December for the first semester courses?
I very much wish I could give you a firm answer on that, but I simply cannot. We simply do not know. Jim, I saw you unmuted your microphone. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, thank you, Richard. You know, as Richard said in his slide, the cost can be prohibitive, $15 for an hour. The effectiveness is really mixed. Sometimes there's an AI record and review. Sometimes there's a live remote proctor. Those tend to be for very high stakes tests, such as licensing, certification, college admission. And there are some significant issues when you have adults proctoring minors, and there can be violations there that we're just trying to look into. We're also trying to see what the AIR or Cambium is going to put out for the Ohio statewide tests on the K-12 side, but we will definitely talk with Leah Amstutz and Matt Winkle this month about that, and share with them that there's a lot of interest with this. I did see that one other person mentioned GoGuardian, and that might have been used for the MAP tests from Northwest Education Association. So we're going to add that to our list to look at. Thank you.
Deanna asks, if a course was year-long and included 2 final semester grades, which grade should we have used for the WebXam grade conversion? Is this a local decision? If we loaded the wrong grade, do we have an opportunity to change it?
That is a great question. And so the guidance that we shared along with the Ohio Department of Education was that if you have 2 sort of semester grades for a year-long course, that you would average those and supply that as the grade, as the final grade. That's the sort of big answer here. It's ultimately a local decision, but the recommendation is that you would have averaged those 2 together and reported that. If there's a issue, if there's something that's been reported that is incorrect as a result of how that was done, I don't know what the EMIS sort of appeal process looks like or what that window is, but that would be the first thing to do, is to get that corrected with EMIS. Once you've done that, then reach out to us at WebXam and we can update WebXam. What's important for us is that we try to keep the data that EMIS has and the data that WebXam has the same, so that when you're running reports in WebXam, you're seeing a very good facsimile of what is in EMIS, so you can make decisions based on correct data. So if there's an issue, I think the first thing you want to do is try to get that addressed in EMIS, and then once it's been addressed in EMIS, contact us and we can update it in WebXam.
Lisa asks, if a community school has a CTPD, is the summary report where they would want to see the data that is going to their CTPD?
Yeah, yes, sort of. So this is a little bit complicated. For community schools, data may not be available to their reporting data may not be available to their CTPD. Instead, it would be available to their ITC. Now, in some cases, that might be the same, but in general, the data that's reported is out of WebXam goes to an ITC, and the ITC then sends it to the district, and then the district then reports it to EMIS. However, and for some community schools, their reporting in WebXam might be set up that their district, that their home district, and then their CTPD can see reporting data. And in that case, they're really seeing the exact same thing that you're seeing when they run reports. And so what they're seeing is going to be in that end of year export report and in the testing report. that's really your source for what data looks like as it gets reported through the whole process. I hope that helps. Community schools are, a big question. So if you have additional sort of concerns along those lines, again, feel free to send us in an email at support@webexam.org, and we'll be happy to sort of address any particular concerns that you might have.
Lisa had another question. Is there any discussion taking place to allow a student to retake a test within the same school year?
There is some discussion about that, and so that's something we've discussed with ODE a bit. The one thing I want to sort of highlight there is that if the concern is about students that weren't able to test last year, then that was the purpose of uploading those course grades, sort of substitute for a test that would have been taken last year that the student wasn't able to take. And so if that student is then testing this year for a course they took last year, that really counts as that retake of the test from last year. But more generally speaking, the idea of being able to sort of give a student 2 tests in the same year is something that is under discussion. I don't think a final decision has been made about that, but as that decision is made, then we'll be sure to communicate that.
KM King asks, can the ANP scores be exportable on a report versus having to hover over individual tests for each student?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I think that's Kelsey. What Kelsey is asking here is, when in the WebXam reporting, when you're seeing a course grade instead of a normal test score, you're only seeing an A for advanced, a P for proficient, and an N for non-proficient. You're not seeing what that sort of becomes as a percent score for the purpose of calculating pathways, or purpose of calculating pathway scores. As Kelsey said, when you hover over that A or N or P, you see what that percentage score is. And I understand completely the need to have that scoring data available in in a form that you can import and use. And so I'd say in those cases, if you need that data, contact us at support@webexam.org, and we'll be happy to work with you to get the data that you need. And what we can do in that case is maybe get you a spreadsheet of the tests that you need to know what those scores are for, and then you can use some Excel magic to sort of merge that data together.
I believe this one is from Rich Messenger. Richard stated that it took 3 tests to get a pathway score. Will that be adjusted to 2 to comply with Perkins 5, 2 courses that make a concentrator?
Yeah, I think that's ultimately an ODE decision, but that is why we made the change in the WebXam to start reporting pathway scores at 2 tests. But in terms of the timing of how that works with new programs, that's really an ODE discussion, and we'll work with ODE to implement it as needed.
Barb has a similar question. For graduation purposes, it currently says they must pass 3 web exams. However, a student can pass overall with passing only 2 of 4. Has this discrepancy been discussed?
Yeah, and I want to highlight this again, that even though in WebXam we start to show you a student's pathway score after 2 tests, with respect to Perkins and how all that goes, as I understand it currently, that student still needs to take 3 tests to pass the pathway in terms of EMIS reporting, in terms of report cards and all that kind of stuff. So even though WebXam is starting to show a pathway score at 2 tests, the students may well still require 3 tests to pass that pathway. And if you're uncertain about what that means for you, what your program is defined as, we can help with that. And then also contacting the Ohio Department of Education and your program specialist can help as well.
And the last question I have documented is from Rich C., which is, what is going to happen if some of the schools go hybrid and we're not able to take the tests in person? Do we give final grades again, or do we have to schedule something special?
I very much wish I had an answer for that question, Rich. I think a lot of that work, this is the kind of year where we're going to have to be flexible in terms of how we address problems as they arise. And so as we go through this year, if we need to make adjustments, we will. And I can just say we'll work with you and sort of try to find a way to make this work. But at present, I don't really have any good firm answers for you there. And when we know what's going on, when we know how the sort of situation changes over the course of the year, then we'll work to address that.
That was all that I had documented. Tyler, did I miss anything? Did you have anything I didn't have?
No, you got them all.
Okay.
So with that, then we'll hang around for a little bit to answer any additional questions that come up. If you have any questions that come up in the coming days or weeks, or obviously at any time, feel free to call us, feel free to email us. We enjoy hearing from you. And as I was sort of covering in my part of the presentation, if you make a suggestion for a feature to be added to WebXam, we do take those seriously and we try to implement those as much as we can. So if you see something that maybe isn't working the way you want it to, let us know and we're happy to address it. And with that, that's sort of the end of the presentation for now. And thank you all very much.
Before everyone leaves, let me praise the team for their presentation. Thank you.
Barb, feel free to type your question in the chat.
And actually, Barb, we're down to a smaller group now. So if you want to just unmute your microphone and ask your question, that's fine too.
I have 2 students that have completed 4 tests. Actually, one has completed 5 tests. And they scored high enough in those 2 areas to get a passing score overall. But how is that impacted? Because everything that I've seen, it says that they need to pass 3.
Yeah, so it needs to be pass at least 3. So if a student has 5 tests in an assessment, that's fine. All 5 of those tests, if they're for different subject codes, all 5 are used for calculating that pathway score. And Barb, if we need to sort of, after this, if we need to get in touch and sort of go through the reporting, make sure everything looks correct, happy to do that.
So even though they've passed overall, they're going to have to retake and try to pass a 3rd test. No,
not at all. I might not be might not be understanding your question correctly, but in general, no. If your students, if you've given the assessments that you're for the content you've taught, and the student is passing in that pathway, then you don't need to give those assessments again. The key thing is for any subject code where you've delivered the content, you want to make sure that you test.
Right. So they've taken four courses. They've taken 4 course tests, and but for graduation purposes, for that competency. So if they meet that overall, then they're done. They're good, even if they haven't passed 3 of the 4.
That's correct. Even if they haven't passed 3 of the 4, our director, Dr. Austin, likes to say the model for pathway scoring is, what's that word you like to use, Jim? It's compensatory. And he's thumbs up, so that's good, I got that word right. And that means that, we sort of put all those scores together. And so that pathway score is not, it doesn't require that students pass a particular number of tests. It just requires that their overall score, when you combine all the tests together, passes. And, I see I think if you're asking about the graduation requirement, that might be worth checking with ODE on as well. I'm not 100% clear on that, and that's really more in their line. So I would say if you have questions specifically about graduation requirement, you may wish to also check with your program specialist at the Ohio Department of Education.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. And if anyone else has any questions, you're welcome to sort of unmute your microphone and ask it.
I've got a question. This might be a little, not quite the central topic you've been covering, but I'm new to this whole career tech thing and a second career coming off retirement with the Air Force. And Fritz Reiser over at Ohio Department of Education has suggested I try to get insight into how the web exams go, you know, to, like you said, to sample them or to practice them. How do I get started with an account? We're here at a River Valley high school, and so we're not a career tech place. We're doing aviation careers. My career with the Air Force was as a pilot. So is there an email place where I get started, or do I have to have that go through the administration or come from the school district some way? What's the, is there a pathway there?
That's a great question. And first off, I'll say thank you for your service. Secondly, most districts that have been delivering career tech assessments have an administrator. It might be a guidance counselor, it might be a vice principal, it might be a principal, who is the sort of what we call the district testing coordinator for WebXam. And so that is the person that you'll want to contact. If you're not sure who that is, just send us an email, support@webexam.org, and we can let you know who you need to contact. And they can create an account for you so that you can begin to sort of exploring the website and figuring out what you need to do. It's fairly important that we try to have you work with your local administrator just to maintain sort of the chain of trust for how WebXam works, and then also so that your administrator knows how to access your account and what it is that you're going to be doing. So check with your administrator. If you don't know who that is, send us in a ticket and we can help you figure that out. And you know, the user's guide on WebXam is publicly available as well. It's at www.webexam.org/admin/docs, DOCS. That's publicly available. You don't need an account for that, so you can start to review that documentation now.
I'd also like to add too that a great way to understand how the whole testing development process works is when your pathway comes around for item writing and you begin to receive information about participation, that you join us for item writing. That allows you to contribute to the creation of tests, the validation of tests, and the standard setting of those tests. And it gives you a good insight onto not only what's going to be on it, so you can teach help teach and guide your students with regard to the tests, but then you also get to contribute your knowledge to that test, and you get an opportunity to network with a lot of your peers, which is great if you're starting out. So I'm not sure when your pathway is coming up for item writing, but when it is, watch for those emails, and if you're still in the field, join us.
Let me just add to that. I think ground transportation and aviation transportation are coming up in 2, possibly 3 years based on the cycle of replacement.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay, last chance to ask any questions. Going once. Going twice, 3 times, and sold. So with that, we'll end this presentation. Thank you all very much for attending. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And again, support@webexam.org, 614-292-4988. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.